A tense moment unfolds mid-flight when a flight attendant's arrogant words cut through the calm. Passengers witness a clash of dignity and prejudice, where a single insult sparks an undercurrent of power, setting the stage for what no one on the plane expects. We don't serve handouts to people like you. If you can't afford to fly first class, don't bring your problems up here. The words snapped like a whip in the hushed cabin, silencing the soft hum of the engines and freezing the air heavier than the recycled oxygen everyone was breathing. A row of startled eyes, families, businessmen, honeymooners, turned toward the scene unfolding at the aisle between rows 2 and 3. The flight attendant stood tall, her blazer crisp, her golden wings gleaming on her chest as though she wore them like a crown. Her smirk was sharp enough to cut through dignity itself. She looked down at the young black mother standing in the aisle, clutching her daughter's hand. The little girl, no older than 7, pressed against her mother's leg, her wide eyes darting nervously across the crowd of strangers, staring. The mother, head wrapped neatly in a scarf, her posture calm yet commanding, did not flinch. Her skin glowed in the cabin's dim lighting, her silence louder than the attendant's venom. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, some holding their breath, but none daring to intervene. "Poor thing," the attendant added, with a mocking tilt of her head, eyes dropping to the child's scuffed sneakers. "Maybe one day she'll get to see what real luxury looks like, if someone buys you a ticket." Gasps. A man in a business suit leaned back in his seat, muttering, "Unbelievable!" An older woman near the window clutched her pearls tighter. Yet no one stood up. No one challenged. The mother's hand moved, slow, deliberate. She reached into her purse, not with the frenzy of defense, but with the grace of ritual. From within, she pulled a boarding stub, pristine, folded once. She held it up, her fingers steady, her expression calm. "This," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the aisle, "is my seat." The attendant's smirk faltered for the briefest second before she snapped back, scoffing, "Paper doesn't change reality." She swiped the stub from the mother's hand, crumpling it with theatrical disdain. The sound of paper crushing echoed louder than the jet engines. The child whimpered softly. Her mother bent, not to comfort with empty words, but to adjust the girl's tiny backpack strap. A symbolic action that told the cabin more than any outburst ever could. "My child carries the weight of your judgment, but I will not let her shoulders break." Rising back up, the mother met the attendant's glare with eyes steady as stone. "Be careful who you call poor," she said, her voice like iron wrapped in velvet. "Because poverty is not always in the wallet. Sometimes it's in the heart." A ripple coursed through the passengers, soft gasps, murmurs, glances exchanged. The businessman lowered his phone where he'd been recording secretly. Someone in coach leaned forward, sensing the energy shift. The attendant's painted smile cracked, but before she could respond, the pilot's voice cut through the speakers above. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into Atlanta. Cabin crew, prepare the cabin for landing." Her grip on the crumpled stub tightened, nails biting into the paper. The mother simply reached for her daughter's hand again, her posture unshaken, her presence unmovable. And then, just before turning back toward her seat, her lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind that holds a secret too heavy to remain hidden forever. Passengers leaned in, sensing the storm beneath her calm. What they did not yet know, what the flight attendant could never have imagined. Was that the woman she called? Poor would soon stand revealed as something far more powerful. The cabin wasn't just preparing for descent, it was bracing for revelation. The plane dipped slightly as it cut through a pocket of turbulence, but the real shaking came from the uneasy tension thick in the cabin. Passengers weren't just strapped into their seats. They were strapped into silence, into the invisible chains of discomfort that follow when cruelty is spoken aloud, and no one rises to stop it. The mother returned quietly to her seat, guiding her daughter into the wide leather cushion of 2B. She smoothed the little girl's braids with delicate fingers, her face betraying none of the storm she had endured. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a stillness so profound that even the hum of the engines seemed quieter around her. Across the aisle, whispers buzzed. "Did you hear what she said?" a young man murmured to his girlfriend, phone still hidden in his lap. "She called her poor." "Out loud," the girlfriend whispered back, eyes wide with disbelief. And no one said anything. 3 rows back, a boy no older than 10 leaned against the window, asking his father, "Dad, why was that lady so mean?" The father shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to the flight attendant striding down the aisle with forced authority. The attendant herself, Rebecca, as the small gold pin above her wings revealed, marched stiffly, her face locked in a smile too practiced to be real. But her eyes betrayed her, restless, flicking to the passengers who dared whisper, catching fragments of judgment that stung sharper than any open protest. She straightened her jacket, squared her shoulders, and leaned toward a couple in first class. "Can I get you anything else before we land?" she asked, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. The woman shook her head, tight-lipped. The man muttered, "Unbelievable," beneath his breath, not meeting Rebecca's gaze. Her painted smile flickered again. Back in seat 2B, the mother's daughter tugged at her sleeve. "Mama," the little girl whispered, voice trembling. "Why did she say we're poor?" The mother paused, her heart tightening. The question wasn't new. She had heard it before in stores, in schools, in stares that judged her skin before her worth. But hearing it now, from her daughter, in a cabin full of strangers who chose silence, it cut deeper than she expected. She cupped her daughter's small face, her voice calm but steady. "Because some people don't see clearly. They mistake kindness for weakness, and silence for shame." The little girl frowned. "But we're not poor." Her mother smiled faintly. "No, baby. We are rich in ways money can't measure." Rebecca turned her head at the words, her jaw tightening. She had expected the woman to retreat into humiliation, to shrink in the shadows of insult. Instead, the mother's presence only grew. Quiet, steady, undeniable. Near the back of the cabin, a man in a blue blazer adjusted his tie, his phone angled discreetly to capture everything. The confrontation had already been clipped into a video. By the time the wheels touched Atlanta, the world outside this plane would see the moment a flight attendant called a black mother poor in front of her child. Rebecca sensed it too. Her steps grew heavier, her smile tighter. "Excuse me," a voice said softly. She turned to see the older woman who had clutched her pearls earlier. Her eyes were steady now. "You should apologize to her." "Right now," Rebecca's lips parted, caught off guard. "Ma'am? I was only—" "No." The woman's voice sliced through the cabin, stronger than her frail hands suggested. "We all heard you. We all saw." Passengers shifted, turning their attention forward. Some nodded. Others avoided eye contact, but the energy had shifted. Silence was crumbling. Rebecca straightened. "I'll handle this when we land." But even as she said it, her voice cracked, just faintly enough for those closest to hear. The mother, still seated with her daughter, lifted her gaze, meeting Rebecca's for the first time since the stub had been crumpled. No words passed between them, yet the message was clear. "You think this story ends here. It doesn't." The captain's voice cut through once more. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Rebecca turned sharply, heading toward the galley, desperate to reclaim control. But behind her, whispers swelled louder, threads of discontent weaving together. The passengers had seen arrogance. They had seen dignity. And in that contrast, their loyalties were shifting. The mother adjusted her daughter's seatbelt, pressing a kiss to her forehead. The girl's eyes closed, trusting, unafraid. Her mother's silence was no longer just a shield. It was a promise. And somewhere in Rebecca's chest, beneath her forced professionalism, a crack widened. She had no idea that the woman she had insulted wasn't just another passenger. She had no idea her own downfall was already in motion. The wheels screeched against the runway, and the cabin jolted forward. But it wasn't the landing that stole Rebecca's breath. It was the way the passengers' eyes lingered on her. No longer neutral, no longer blind. For the first time in years of flying, she wasn't the one in control of the cabin's air. The descent had only just begun. The wheels screeched, rubber meeting asphalt, with a shudder that rippled through every seat. For a moment, all else was drowned out by the mechanical roar of descent. The rattling trays, the shivering windows, the steady announcement from the cockpit, guiding them back to Earth. But as the plane slowed, the silence that settled afterward wasn't relief. It was judgment. It clung to the air heavier than the smell of recycled coffee drifting from the galley. The mother sat still, her daughter curled against her side, eyes half closed with the innocent exhaustion of a child who trusts her world will remain intact. The mother stroked her hair gently, her face unreadable, as if her calmness had been carved into stone long before this flight ever took off. Rebecca walked briskly down the aisle, her heels sharp against the carpet, her smile sharper still. But it fooled no one now. The passengers' gazes followed her every move. The businessman who had muttered "unbelievable" earlier leaned forward, arms folded, studying her. The older woman who had demanded she apologize held her chin high, unafraid of being noticed again. Even the teenagers in row 6, who had spent most of the flight with headphones plugged in, now whispered, "She's trending already. Look." The glow of a phone screen flickered. Rebecca's words, her smirk, her insult, all captured in unforgiving clarity. The video was short, no more than 20 seconds, but it didn't need to be longer. Rebecca's stomach dropped. She had seen careers end in less time. "Cabin crew, disarm doors and cross-check," the captain's voice commanded. Rebecca's smile faltered. She stumbled toward the door, fumbling at the handle as though she could wrestle back control from the eyes boring into her back. Her fingers tightened around the crumpled stub still shoved into her pocket, the paper damp with sweat. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a familiar chime. Passengers rose, stretching, retrieving bags from overhead bins. But the usual shuffle of impatience was absent. Instead, the cabin filled with murmurs, fragments of conversations sharp enough to slice through her composure. She didn't even deny it. Poor? To her? Did you see the way she held herself? Someone's going viral tonight. Rebecca swallowed, throat dry. She forced her professional tone. "Please remain seated until the doors are open. Thank you for flying with us." No one responded. No polite smiles, no nods. Just silence. Thick and suffocating. The mother stood finally, graceful even in the cramped aisle. She adjusted her daughter's backpack strap once more. The same simple gesture from earlier. But this time, it felt like a declaration. "We carry ourselves with dignity, no matter the weight you place on us." She turned toward the door, her daughter's hand nestled in hers. Rebecca stepped aside mechanically, though her jaw clenched as the pair passed her. The little girl looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes, not hateful, not fearful, but something worse, disappointed. It pierced Rebecca deeper than anger ever could. As the mother and daughter exited the cabin, the businessman rose behind them. He adjusted his tie and said just loud enough for her to hear, "Some people are too small for the uniforms they wear." Rebecca froze, heat crawling up her neck. She forced herself to look ahead, plastering her smile back on as more passengers filed out, each glance a silent verdict. The jet bridge smelled faintly of metal and disinfectant. The mother walked with measured steps, each one echoing in the tunnel like a drum beat. Her daughter skipped once, trying to shake off the heaviness of the flight, but clung tighter to her mother's hand, when the whispers followed them even here. Is that her? Yeah, that's the one. Record, record! Phone cameras glowed again, capturing not just the woman who had been insulted, but the poise with which she carried herself past the crowd. Rebecca lingered at the door of the aircraft, watching the phones rise, her chest tightening. She knew what those lenses meant. She knew her face, her voice, her smirk. They were already free from her control. The airport terminal bustled with its usual chaos. Families reuniting, businessmen hurrying to connections, travelers searching for baggage claim signs. Yet in the middle of it all, a ripple of awareness spread around the mother and child, as if the entire space shifted to acknowledge their quiet gravity. She wasn't a passenger anymore. She was the center of a story that had only begun to unfold. Rebecca followed at a distance, heart pounding. She clutched her phone, debating whether to call her supervisor before the videos reached headquarters. But she knew it was too late. The world had already taken off, even as her career prepared for a crash landing. The mother glanced back once, catching Rebecca's figure in the crowd. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. The mother's expression was unreadable, but her faint smile carried the same promise as before. Be careful who you call poor. Some truths can't stay hidden forever. And in that fleeting moment, Rebecca felt it. Not just fear of exposure, but the first tremor of something worse. The unraveling of the story she thought she controlled. The storm had landed with them. The terminal was alive with sound. Rolling suitcases rattling over tiles, the echo of announcements calling out boarding zones, the laughter of children running toward waiting relatives. Yet, for those who had been on Flight 227, the noise was just a cover for the silence that lingered between them. Rebecca walked stiffly through the jet bridge, her crisp blazer suddenly feeling like a costume she no longer deserved. The pin above her chest weighed heavier than ever, as if its golden sheen mocked her. She could still hear the whispers from the cabin, see the glow of phone screens capturing her words. She knew what came next. She'd seen other attendants falter before. Minor mistakes turned viral, reputations shattered overnight. But this wasn't a spilled drink or a rude reply. This was different. Her insult hadn't just touched one woman. It had stained everyone who watched in silence. The mother moved with quiet grace, her daughter's hand firmly in hers, weaving through the crowded terminal. Eyes followed them, some curious, some sympathetic, some just eager for gossip. A young man lifted his phone discreetly, recording again. The mother didn't flinch. She didn't acknowledge the cameras. Her silence was louder than any speech she could give. Is that her? Someone whispered behind a pillar. The one she called poor? Yeah. She doesn't look poor to me. The mother's scarf caught the fluorescent light overhead, its soft fabric gleaming like armor. Her posture was tall, shoulders back, steps deliberate. She didn't rush. She didn't shrink. She walked as though she carried more than luggage, as though she carried a secret the world wasn't ready for. Rebecca followed at a distance, heart hammering. She pulled out her phone, fumbling through contacts until she found the number of her supervisor. Her thumb hovered over call. But before she could press it, she saw the businessman from first class glance back at her. His look wasn't just disapproval. It was disdain. He mouthed two words she couldn't unsee. You're finished. Her throat closed. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, her hands clammy. At baggage claim, the carousel whirred to life, spitting out suitcases with hollow thuds. The mother waited patiently, her daughter leaning against her side, eyes scanning for their familiar blue luggage. A few passengers from the flight lingered nearby, watching Rebecca instead of their own bags. She hasn't even apologized, someone murmured. She thinks she's untouchable. She doesn't realize who that woman is. Rebecca stiffened. Her eyes flicked to the mother. For the first time, she noticed the small details she had overlooked in her arrogance. The tailored cut of the woman's coat, The subtle elegance of her shoes, the quiet confidence with which she held herself. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't poverty. This was power, disguised as humility. The carousel delivered the blue suitcase, sliding across the rubber belt. The mother lifted it easily, placing it upright with a calm strength. Her daughter clapped her hands, relieved. Rebecca's nails dug into her palm. She wanted to walk up, to say something, anything that might soften the blow. But her pride chained her tongue, and the mother, without so much as a glance, began to walk toward the exit. The crowd parted for her, not out of fear but out of recognition, an unspoken acknowledgement of her dignity. Phones rose again, capturing the image of a woman walking unbothered while whispers circled around her like shadows. Rebecca's chest tightened. She tried to step forward, but her feet refused. She knew instinctively that any words now would not be heard as apology, but as desperation, and desperation had no place in dignity's shadow. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, letting in the cool Atlanta night air. The mother and daughter stepped through, their silhouettes framed by the lights outside. For a brief moment, they looked untouchable, figures walking out of judgment and into destiny. Rebecca stood frozen at the edge of the terminal. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, her pulse racing. Around her, voices still whispered, "She'll regret this." She already does. Wait until the story breaks. But it wasn't the strangers' voices that haunted her. It was the mother's voice from the cabin, echoing in her mind like a curse she couldn't escape. Be careful who you call poor. Poverty is not always in the wallet. Sometimes it's in the heart. Rebecca pressed a hand against her chest, as if to quiet the words, but they only grew louder inside her. And outside, beyond the terminal doors, the world was waiting, not just for a story of insult and dignity, but for the revelation that would flip everything upside down. The storm hadn't passed. It was circling, tightening, preparing to strike. The automatic doors parted with a hiss, spilling the mother and her daughter into the cool Atlanta night. The air outside was a mix of exhaust fumes and damp concrete, yet it carried a freedom the cabin had denied them. The little girl inhaled deeply, tugging her mother's hand. "Mama, we're home," she said softly. Though Atlanta wasn't truly their home, it was just another city in transit. But the words carried truth. Home wasn't walls and a roof. Home was wherever dignity stayed intact. The mother smiled faintly. "Yes, baby, we are." But as they walked farther into the crowd, home felt less certain. Waiting near the terminal doors were clusters of strangers with glowing screens. Some had watched the video during the flight. Others had seen it posted within minutes of landing. The caption spread like fire. Flight attendant calls Black mother poor in first class. The mother's face, serene and strong, filled the thumbnails. Rebecca's smirk, sharp and arrogant, filled the rest. Reporters had already gathered. Local, fast-moving, hungry for spectacle. A microphone appeared in the mother's path. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened on the flight?" She didn't pause, didn't flinch. She moved with her daughter at her side, suitcase trailing behind her like a loyal shadow. Her silence wasn't avoidance, it was refusal. She would not let their cameras dictate her story. Rebecca emerged moments later, tugging her blazer into place, trying to stretch her smile over cracking composure. The flash of phones hit her immediately, voices rising. "Miss, do you have a response? Are you going to apologize? Did you really call her poor?" Rebecca's throat constricted. She lifted her chin, forcing professionalism into her tone. "I can't comment on ongoing matters. Please direct your questions to corporate communications." But the words fell flat, rehearsed, hollow. The businessman from first class had lingered near the exit. He shook his head as Rebecca passed. "You don't realize the storm you've walked into," he muttered. Rebecca's steps faltered. She turned quickly, catching the mother in the crowd ahead. The woman's scarf caught the breeze, flowing like a banner. Her daughter clutched her hand, eyes bright, face unafraid. Every lens turned toward them, drawn to their unspoken power. A whisper spread among the reporters. "Do you know who she is?" "No, who?" Wait, I've seen her face before." Rebecca's pulse spiked. She moved faster, desperate to get ahead of the murmurs, but the crowd was shifting, bending toward the mother and daughter as though pulled by gravity. The mother finally stopped, not because of the questions, but because her daughter tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, why are they all staring?" She crouched, adjusting the girl's backpack strap once more. The simple gesture, repeated now, had become ritual, a reminder. The world may stare, but we will never bow. She kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "They stare because truth frightens people before it frees them." The girl's eyes softened, trusting. She held her mother's hand tighter. Behind them, Rebecca froze, mid-step. The words cut through her as if meant for her alone. For the first time, doubt seeped into her arrogance. Not just fear of exposure, but the gnawing realization that she had insulted someone who carried more power than she could comprehend. A journalist raised his voice. "Ma'am, is it true you're connected to the airline?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rebecca's stomach lurched. The mother didn't answer, but her faint smile spoke volumes. The businessman smirked knowingly. The older woman from the cabin tilted her chin proudly, as if she had known all along. Even strangers who hadn't been on the flight leaned forward, sensing revelation in the air. Rebecca's heart pounded. No, it can't be. She's just a passenger. But doubt had taken root. And with it came panic. The mother stood tall again, her hand resting lightly on her daughter's shoulder. She didn't make a speech. She didn't need to. Her silence was declaration enough. Around her, phones continued recording, capturing not just a scandal, but the prologue to a truth ready to explode. Rebecca stepped back, her chest tight, the whispers swelling louder. She felt small, smaller than she had ever felt in uniform, and in that shrinking, she realized something terrifying. The descent wasn't over. It had only just begun. The morning sun spilled through the glass towers of Atlanta's financial district, casting long beams of light across the city. On the 12th floor of the airline's corporate headquarters, silence had replaced the usual hum of keyboards and phone calls. Screens glowed across the open floor, each one playing the same viral clip. "We don't serve handouts to people like you." The words replayed over and over, filling the space with a shame that no mute button could silence. Employees whispered in clusters, their faces pale, their eyes darting toward the glass-walled conference room at the center of the floor. Inside, Rebecca sat stiffly at the long, polished table. Her blazer was the same, but her confidence was gone. A paper cup of coffee shook faintly in her hands. Across from her, 3 executives watched in cold silence. The VP of Customer Relations, the head of Corporate Communications, and the Chief Operating Officer himself. On the table, a phone vibrated with every new notification. Another video. Another repost. Another headline. Rebecca cleared her throat, her voice brittle. It was taken out of context. The woman she was demanding things outside her ticket class. "I only enforced policy." The COO's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, pressing pause on the screen so her smirk froze mid-frame, immortalized in cruelty. "This isn't policy, Rebecca. This is prejudice caught on camera." Her lips trembled. "I've served this airline for 11 years. My record is spotless. One mistake." "Some mistakes don't wash off," the VP interrupted coldly. "This isn't a spilled drink. This is the world watching us humiliate a passenger." Rebecca's eyes flicked between them, desperate for an anchor. "I'll apologize, publicly. But the COO raised his hand, silencing her. "It's not about apology anymore. It's about who she is. Rebecca froze. She's just... The door swung open. Every head turned. The mother stepped inside. The room shifted instantly, the air sucked out like the oxygen had been stolen. Her scarf framed her face, her eyes steady, her daughter absent this time, left safely outside. She carried no lawyers, no entourage, just herself, standing taller than the executives seated before her. Rebecca's breath caught. Her mouth opened, then closed again, words fleeing before they could form. The COO rose first, his posture stiff but respectful. "Mrs. Daniels, thank you for coming." Gasps rippled through the employees gathered beyond the glass. A name, recognition, something that tied the woman to more than just the viral clip. Rebecca blinked rapidly. "Mrs. Daniels?" she whispered. The mother's voice was calm, unhurried. "I believe you already know what happened on that flight. I'm not here to repeat it." The VP leaned forward, nervous, eyes darting to the frozen screen still showing Rebecca's insult. "Mrs. Daniels, please understand, the airline deeply regrets this incident. We are reviewing it at the highest level." Rebecca swallowed hard. Her voice cracked. You know her?" The COO didn't look at Rebecca. His eyes stayed fixed on the mother. "Of course we know her. She's not just a passenger." The mother placed her hand gently on the table, her fingers resting on the polished wood, as though it were already hers. Her tone was soft, but each word landed with weight. "I'm the majority shareholder of this airline." The room fell silent. Even the phones beyond the glass seemed to stop buzzing. Rebecca's cup slipped from her hand, coffee spilling across the table, soaking into her trembling fingers. She stared at the woman she had called poor, the same woman she had mocked before an entire cabin of witnesses. Her voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "You bought the airline?" The mother's eyes never wavered. "Not yesterday. Not because of you. I've owned it for months." The executives exchanged glances, relief mixing with fear. Relief, because the truth had been revealed before the press could twist it further. Fear, because this wasn't just scandal anymore. This was betrayal of their own owner. Rebecca's shoulders slumped. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, panic flooding her veins. The mother turned slightly, her gaze cutting straight through Rebecca. "You thought you held power in that cabin, but arrogance blinds. You never stopped to ask who I was. You only assumed what I wasn't." Her words struck harder than any shout. They echoed in Rebecca's chest, collapsing the fragile shell of superiority she had clung to. The COO cleared his throat. "Mrs. Daniels, what actions would you like us to take?" For a long moment, the mother said nothing. She let the silence stretch, her calm presence forcing everyone to sit in the weight of their own discomfort. Finally, she spoke, her voice smooth as glass. "I don't need to tell you what justice looks like. You already know." Her eyes lingered on Rebecca one last time. Then she turned and walked out, her scarf trailing like a banner of quiet revolution. The door shut softly behind her. Rebecca collapsed back into her chair, her vision blurring, her chest hollow. Around her, the executive's stares bore into her, cold and unflinching. The viral clip wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of her collapse. And outside, in the hallways of power, whispers were already shifting. Not about the scandal, about the woman who owned it all. The city pulsed with a restless energy. Its heartbeat synced to the glow of television screens and the scroll of phones in countless hands. From hotel lobbies to living rooms, from subway cars to airport gates, the same headline blazed across the world. Flight attendant calls Black mother poor. Passenger revealed as airline owner. In the newsroom of Channel 7, anchors sat rigid at their desks, their faces lit by the stark glow of studio lights. Behind them, the viral video looped like a wound reopening again and again. The clip played without mercy, Rebecca's sneer, her biting words, the passengers' shocked gasps, and the mother's silent dignity. "Tonight," the anchor began, his voice heavy with practiced gravity. "A viral video has ignited outrage nationwide. A black mother, traveling with her young daughter, was humiliated by a flight attendant who dismissed her as poor. What the attendant didn't know, what the world is just now learning, is that this passenger is, in fact, the majority shareholder of the very airline she was insulted on." Across the country, jaws dropped, Rebecca sat in her apartment, curtains drawn, her laptop glowing cruelly in the dim room. Every news channel carried her face now, frozen in her ugliest moment. She clicked one link after another, headlines screaming, comment sections filled with rage. Fire her. This is what racism looks like in uniform. Imagine insulting the woman who signs your paycheck. Her phone buzzed uncontrollably. Old friends texted half-hearted support. Strangers hurled venom. Even her family's messages felt distant, tainted by shame. She pressed her palms into her temples, rocking slightly. "It's not fair," she whispered to herself. It was just a mistake. One mistake. But outside her small cocoon, the mistake had grown into a storm. In the airline's headquarters, executives gathered once again. But the tone was different now. Screens displayed live coverage. Reporters stationed outside the very building they sat in. The COO wiped sweat from his brow. "This isn't just PR anymore. This is survival." The VP of Communications chimed in sharply. "We're bleeding reputation by the hour. Stockholders are already calling. The only leverage we have is Mrs. Daniels. And her silence." "Her silence won't last," another executive muttered. "It never does." Meanwhile, in a modest neighborhood across town, Mrs. Daniels sat in her kitchen, her daughter coloring at the table beside her. The television played softly in the background, her own face blurred in a still frame, reporters repeating her name. She sipped her tea, steady, as though the world wasn't spinning faster outside her walls. Her daughter looked up, curious. "Mama, why are they talking about you on TV?" She smiled gently, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. "Because people are learning something they should have known all along." Her daughter tilted her head. "That you own the airplane?" Mrs. Daniels' smile deepened. "Not just the airplane, baby. The whole company." The little girl's eyes widened in awe, the crayon slipping from her fingers. She whispered, "Then why did that lady call you poor?" The question cut sharper than any headline. Mrs. Daniels's gaze shifted, her expression firm but calm. "Because some people see only what they want to see. But the truth has a way of finding light." Across the world, that truth was blazing. On Twitter, hashtags trended relentlessly. Flight of racism, use Daniels Air, use justice in the sky. Instagram Reels played the confrontation with dramatic captions. TikTok flooded with remixes, reactions, and stitched commentary. Even politicians tweeted their outrage, vowing accountability for systemic prejudice. Rebecca's name became a symbol of disgrace, her photo splashed side by side with Mrs. Daniels's serene face. Two women, one moment, worlds apart in dignity. In a downtown cafe, strangers argued heatedly. She humiliated her on purpose. You can see it in her face. Doesn't matter if she owned the airline or not, racism is racism. And now she's her boss. That's karma right there. The story wasn't just news anymore. It had become myth, retold, reshaped, amplified, until it belonged to everyone. Back in her apartment, Rebecca's phone rang again. This time it was a blocked number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Rebecca." The voice was calm, steady, recognizable. She froze. "Mrs. Daniels?" A pause stretched across the line like a blade. "You've been watching the news, I assume." Rebecca's throat tightened. I never meant for it to—" Mrs. Daniels cut her off gently, her words precise. "The world sees what you meant. No amount of excuses will change that. Rebecca's hand shook as she clutched the phone. Please, I'll apologize. I'll beg. You don't need to beg me, Mrs. Daniels said, her tone even, unshaken. Your apology was never mine to claim. It belongs to every person who has ever been treated the way you treated me. The silence on the other end stretched unbearably. Rebecca's tears blurred her vision, rolling unchecked down her cheeks. Finally, Mrs. Daniels's voice softened, almost like a whisper. The world doesn't forget arrogance, but it also never forgets dignity. That's the difference between you and me. Click. The line went dead. Rebecca sat frozen, the weight of the silence pressing her into the couch. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was a headline, a lesson, a name that parents would tell their children when teaching what not to become. Outside, the city roared on, the story consuming every corner, every screen. And within that storm, one truth stood immovable. The woman she had mocked now owned her future. The boardroom stretched like a cathedral of glass and steel, its ceiling high, its walls polished to a cold shine. At the far end of the long mahogany table, leather chairs sat filled with the men and women who had steered the airline for decades. But tonight, none of them looked in control. The viral storm had not only tarnished their brand, it had exposed the hollow foundations beneath their pride. Shareholders were furious. Politicians had called for hearings, and beyond the tinted windows, reporters clustered like hawks, their camera flashes breaking through the night. The COO adjusted his tie nervously, glancing toward the double doors. She's on her way. The directors exchanged uneasy looks. Some whispered. Some avoided eye contact entirely. But all of them knew. The balance of power in this room no longer belonged to them. The doors opened. Mrs. Daniels stepped inside. The air shifted instantly, like the room itself drew breath. She wore no corporate armor, no power suit, no diamond jewelry, just a modest dress, her scarf gracefully pinned, her walk steady, unhurried. Her presence carried more weight than any title could. Mrs. Daniels, the COO began, rising awkwardly to his feet. Thank you for joining us. She nodded politely, her gaze sweeping across the table. You wanted me here. Yes, of course, another director stammered. We wanted to assure you personally that this matter is being handled with utmost seriousness. She took her seat at the head of the table, a place that had long belonged to others, but seemed to fit her as though it had been waiting for her all along. She folded her hands calmly on the table. I don't doubt your seriousness, she said softly. What I doubt is your memory. The directors exchanged uneasy glances. Memory? One asked carefully. Yes, her eyes swept the room. Because this isn't the first time your staff have treated someone with contempt. It isn't the first time arrogance outweighed compassion. But it is the first time your mistake sat in this chair. The silence was deafening. At that moment, the doors opened again. 2 security officers entered, escorting Rebecca. She looked smaller than she ever had before. Her uniform was gone, replaced by plain clothes, her hair disheveled, her face pale. She avoided eye contact, her eyes fixed on the floor as they led her to a single chair at the far end of the table. The weight of the room pressed down on her, the walls closing in. Rebecca's hands shook as she gripped the armrests. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, escaping in fragments. Please, I didn't know. I didn't know who she was. Mrs. Daniels tilted her head slightly, her tone calm but firm. And if I wasn't who I am, would your words have been different? Rebecca flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't mean... You meant every word, Mrs. Daniels interrupted softly. Because you believed they carried no cost. The board members shifted uncomfortably. For years they had hidden behind policies, behind contracts, behind silence. But now silence seemed cowardly. Rebecca looked around desperately. I've given 11 years to this company. I worked holidays, nights, double shifts. And in one moment, Mrs. Daniels said, her voice cutting gently through Rebecca's plea, you gave 11 years of service, the face of prejudice. The world will not remember your loyalty. They will remember your arrogance. Rebecca sobbed openly now, her shoulders shaking. I'll do anything. Please, don't take everything from me. Mrs. Daniels leaned back slightly, her eyes unreadable. For a moment it seemed like she might offer mercy. But her next words came with the weight of truth, not vengeance. I'm not here to take. I'm here to reveal. What you've lost is not because of me. It's because of what you chose to be when no one was watching. The COO cleared his throat nervously. Mrs. Daniels, the board will follow whatever course of action you recommend. Termination, legal action, public statement. Mrs. Daniels raised a hand, silencing him. She turned back to Rebecca, her voice steady. What I require from you is not an apology to me. It is an acknowledgement to the world that every passenger, no matter their color, their clothing, their class, deserves dignity. Rebecca's lips trembled. I'll say it. I'll go on camera. Mrs. Daniels's eyes softened, but only slightly. Words mean nothing without change. Your voice has already burned trust. Whether anyone listens now, that isn't up to me. Rebecca bowed her head, her sobs muffled against the quiet weight of the room. The directors looked at Mrs. Daniels with a mixture of awe and unease. They had seen leaders scream, demand, threaten, but never dismantle someone with calm truth. Finally, Mrs. Daniels rose from her chair. She smoothed the edge of her scarf, her dignity unshaken. This airline has carried millions of people, she said, her voice carrying through the room. But tonight, it will carry a message louder than engines. Dignity is not optional. She stepped toward the door, her heels echoing against the floor like a gavel striking judgment. When the doors closed behind her, the boardroom erupted in whispers, but none of them were about Rebecca anymore. They were all about her. The ballroom of the downtown hotel had been transformed overnight into a fortress of flashing lights and polished podiums. Reporters filled every seat, their cameras perched like watchful birds, their microphones pointed toward the stage where history was about to speak. At the center stood a lectern draped in the airline's insignia. Behind it, an empty chair waited. Security lined the walls, holding back the restless crowd of journalists, activists, and shareholders who had come to see not a scandal, but its reckoning. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator announced, his voice firm, Mrs. Daniels will be addressing you shortly. The room buzzed. Phones lifted. Laptops clicked. Everyone braced for the woman at the heart of the storm. When the side door opened, silence fell like a curtain. Mrs. Daniels stepped into the light. Her attire was modest, yet regal, her scarf pinned neatly, her walk deliberate but calm. She carried no notes, no entourage, just herself. But her presence filled the space more powerfully than any rehearsed speech could. She reached the lectern, adjusting the microphone slightly. Cameras snapped furiously, capturing the image that would soon flood every news outlet across the world. The woman once mocked as poor, now standing as the undeniable owner of the skies. "Good evening," she began. Her voice was low but steady, each syllable weighted with calm authority. "You've all seen the video. You've heard the words that were spoken to me, and you've asked yourselves why I chose to remain silent until now." Her eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of strangers as though they were old friends. "I remained silent," she continued, "because dignity does not need to shout. Silence is not weakness, it is patience, and patience reveals more than anger ever could." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She leaned closer to the microphone. "But tonight, I will no longer remain silent. Tonight, I speak not for myself, but for every passenger who has ever been judged before they were served. For every traveler who has been treated as less because of how they looked, where they came from, or what others assumed they could afford. The words struck like thunder, though her tone never rose above calm. In that moment on the plane, I was called poor, not because of my bank account, not because of my status, but because of prejudice. Because some people believe that dignity is reserved for the wealthy, the powerful, or the privileged. They forget that dignity is not a currency. It is a right. Applause erupted, breaking the tension. But she raised her hand gently, and the room stilled again. I could have revealed my ownership in that cabin. I could have silenced her arrogance with a single fact. But I didn't. Because power does not come from proving people wrong. It comes from proving dignity right. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of her expression. "Rebecca was wrong," she said, her voice unwavering. "But this story is not just about her. It is about every institution that allows arrogance to hide behind uniforms, policies, and silence. It is about every leader who forgets that leadership is service, not entitlement." She paused, letting the words linger like smoke. "And so, as the majority shareholder of this airline, I want to make one thing clear. This company will no longer tolerate arrogance disguised as professionalism. We will no longer allow prejudice to masquerade as policy. From this day forward, dignity will be our first class, and every passenger will sit in it." The room erupted again, applause and cheers rising, cameras flashing endlessly. Rebecca, watching from a dim office across town, felt the words pierce her deeper than any disciplinary letter could. Each phrase stripped her further of the armor she had once worn with pride. She wasn't just losing her job, she was becoming a symbol of everything people would fight against. Back in the ballroom, reporters shouted questions, their voices colliding. "Mrs. Daniels, will Rebecca be terminated? Do you plan to pursue legal action? Do you feel vindicated?" She raised her hand, the room softening into silence once more. "I don't seek vengeance," she said quietly. "What I seek is transformation. Rebecca's fate is not for me to decide alone. It is for this company, and for the world that watched. But understand this, dignity is not negotiable. Not for me, not for you, not for anyone." Her words drew a standing ovation. Activists cheered. Shareholders nodded gravely. And beyond the ballroom, the story traveled faster than any airplane. Into homes, into hearts, into history. For the first time in days, Mrs. Daniels allowed herself a small smile. Not of victory, but of purpose. She had not only defended herself, she had redefined what leadership meant. As she stepped away from the podium, the cameras followed her until the doors closed behind her, sealing the moment in memory. And in that silence, one truth remained unshaken. Power shouts, but dignity echoes. The airport never truly slept. Even in the middle of the night, it pulsed with life. Announcements echoing through the intercom, the shuffle of passengers rushing to distant gates, the hum of engines vibrating through the walls. But tonight, the atmosphere carried something heavier, a silence layered beneath the noise. In the staff lounge tucked away behind security, Rebecca sat alone. Her uniform badge lay on the table, its shine dulled, its authority meaningless. Around her, lockers stood closed like sealed judgments. She clutched a folded letter in her hands. The termination notice. Her eyes scanned the words again, though she already knew them by heart. Effective immediately. Breach of company values. Reputation damage. The rest blurred into static. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered to herself, "One mistake, and everything's gone." But deep inside, she knew it wasn't one mistake. It was 1,000 small cruelties, invisible when no cameras were watching, now magnified into one unforgettable moment. The door creaked open. A fellow attendant peeked inside, hesitation in her eyes. "Rebecca, I just wanted to say, I can't defend what you did, but I hope you learn from it. Rebecca nodded weakly, unable to form words. The woman left, the door closing softly, leaving her in silence once more. Meanwhile, across town, the Daniels household glowed with a different kind of light. In the quiet of her living room, Mrs. Daniels sat with her daughter curled up beside her. The little girl rested her head on her mother's shoulder, eyes heavy with sleep. "Mama," she murmured, "are people still talking about you?" Mrs. Daniels stroked her daughter's hair gently. "Yes, baby, they're still talking. Are they mad?" She smiled faintly. Some are proud. But most are learning," the little girl yawned. "Learning what? That you don't measure people by what they wear or what they own. You measure them by how they treat others." Her daughter's eyes fluttered shut, a small smile on her lips. "That's what you did." Mrs. Daniels kissed her forehead softly. "That's what we must always do." The child drifted into sleep, her breathing steady, innocent. Mrs. Daniels sat quietly, gazing out the window at the distant horizon where airplanes blinked like stars across the sky. The next morning, the world awoke to her image splashed across every front page. Headlines read, "Airline owner turns racism into revolution." "Dignity flies first class." Editorials praised her calm strength. Activists called her a beacon of quiet resistance. Shareholders marveled at her poise under pressure. And ordinary travelers, from bus stations to boardrooms, carried her story like a lantern through the dark corners of their own experiences. Rebecca's name, too, filled the headlines, but in smaller print, accompanied by words like disgraced, terminated, cautionary tale. She had become a warning, not a leader. At the airline's headquarters, changes began to ripple. Diversity training sessions weren't just symbolic, they were mandatory. Policies were rewritten to protect dignity as fiercely as safety. And for the first time, the company's slogan shifted. Every seat carries respect. Mrs. Daniels didn't bask in the attention. She didn't grant endless interviews or pose for glossy magazine covers. Instead, she returned quietly to her work, her life, her daughter. Her dignity was never about the spotlight. It was about the silence that follows when truth has spoken. One evening, weeks later, she walked through the airport once more. Passengers bustled around her, luggage wheels rattling, announcements echoing. But this time, people recognized her. Some nodded respectfully. Some whispered her name. A few approached just to say, "Thank you." She acknowledged them with a gentle smile. Nothing more. At Gate 12, a flight attendant greeted passengers with practiced warmth. The young woman's eyes widened as she recognized Mrs. Daniels. She straightened nervously, fumbling with her words. "Good evening, ma'am." "Welcome aboard." Mrs. Daniels paused, studying her for a moment, not with suspicion, but with quiet understanding. "Good evening," she replied softly. As she boarded, her daughter tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, why do they all look at you like that?" She leaned down, whispering gently, "Because sometimes one moment can change the way people see the world." Her daughter's eyes sparkled. "Like a story?" Mrs. Daniels smiled. "Exactly like a story." The plane lifted into the night, its engines roaring as it climbed above the clouds. Lights of the city flickered below, fading into darkness. Up here, there were no labels, no insults, no arrogance, only sky, endless and open, carrying every passenger equally. Mrs. Daniels looked out the window, her reflection merging with the stars. She whispered to herself, not as an owner, not as a victim, but as a mother who had taught the world a lesson without raising her voice. Dignity always flies higher. And as the plane soared, so did her truth, etched forever in the skies.